Welcome to Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180 for the best in Saturday Talk Radio at 1 o'clock. And now we're on 1230 KGEO at 10 o'clock on Saturday. And, drumroll Clay, for the best in Wednesday Talk Radio on 1410 KERI on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock. Your host is Clay Koerner and I'm Marty Pay. Behind the big board, our producer, Greg Held. Clay, fun show last week with Scott Woods, Mr. Punchline.
It was a different show, and it was a lot of fun. I laughed through the whole thing.
Yeah, I did too, and it's nice to have a nice, clean comedian that can make you laugh and not have to, stretch you a little further than you want to stretch.
Well, I actually get that same thing on CNN every day.
Ba-da-dump. I'm really looking forward to the next couple of weeks on the show. We've got Senator Orrin Hatch talking about Obamacare coming on. Steve Moore from the Wall Street Journal next week, and actually in 2 weeks. And then next week we have Matthew Lysick from the New York Daily News talking about his great book entitled The Choice, Ronald Reagan versus Barack Obama in the campaign of 2012. That's an interesting premise for a book, isn't it?
Well, let's get to our guest today.
We will in a quick moment. And something else we're going to do next week is we've been talking quite a bit about our POW in Afghanistan, Sergeant Bergdahl.
Right.
Well, there's a family that's collected over 40,000 signatures they're going to present to Congress next week, and we're going to talk about that. But today we've got two very special guests. In the second half, we have June Hall McCash talking about her new book, A Titanic Love Story. The story of Ida and Isidore Straus, who were the co-owners of Macy's, and they went down on the Titanic 100 years ago next month. But right now, on the phone, we are honored to have Fox commentator, author, former NPR commentator, which we can talk about if he wants to, Juan Williams on the phone. Juan, welcome to Taking Care of Business.
Oh, I'm delighted to join you. Thank you. And I hope that I stay afloat.
Is it going to be that kind of show?
We'll throw you a life raft.
You had a comedian last week, and I thought what you're going to do next week on the Titanic. I didn't know that about the owners of Macy's. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. Did you see the movie Titanic?
I did.
Yeah, I'm not much on Westerns, but I watched it. But but the older couple that was in the that was lying in bed in their stateroom and just laid there the entire time.
Right.
Well, that was the Strausses, but what they actually did was, and I'm actually giving part of this away, but she had one foot in the lifeboat, looked up at her husband and said, "I can't go without you." And they actually were sitting in chairs, holding hands, people watching them as the wave crashed over, and they were gone.
And we'll hear about that next week.
No, actually, we're going to hear about
today.
it in half an hour.
Yeah, later today.
Wow, what a great story.
Yeah, see, what's going to happen is in half an hour when we have this lady on, we're going to talk about you, so we're kind of...
Now I know a different story that really interests me, and Juan, that was when you left public radio and went to Fox on a full-time basis.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I wrote a book about it called Muzzled, The Assault on Honest Debate, and in that book, one of the things that I talk about is how just deflating it was to have someone, describe you as a bigot and an idiot for simply stating the obvious. And it wasn't even an opinion, but an admission of a feeling. And the feeling was that if I'm in an airport and I see people dressed in Muslim garb getting on my plane, I have a moment of anxiety or nervousness. I didn't say I was subscribing to having that person stopped or prevented from flying. I know we've all been through security and the like, but in the aftermath of 9/11, I think that's a sincere and honest feeling, not held solely by me, but by many.
I thought that was interesting, a liberal calling a moderate an idiot. I mean, that's kind of an oxymoron there almost. Well, tell us about the book, because I did a little research on the book last night, and I do a lot of books on tape because I do a lot of driving, and I'm actually finishing a book right now by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that I'm really interested with, but yours is next on my list because it is on tape, and I actually heard an excerpt of you doing the book on tape, because you're the voice on the book, and you had an interesting little explanation as to why it felt good for you to do the book on tape. I don't know if you remember that segment or not.
Well, I think it was wonderful for me to do the book on tape because it gave me the opportunity to let people hear my voice and hear my story in my voice. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, because it was kind of almost you made it sound like it was almost a release for you to be able to do this, because here you are, you just went through this experience, which is kind of maddening, especially with all the time you had there. So here you had this experience to be able to talk about it, vent about it, by actually giving your book, orally.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things about writing for me is that it's such a private act. I mean, it's in your head to write something, and you're trying to get what's in your head onto the page. So what's distinct about doing the reading and the oral version of the book for people who want to buy the CD is that it feels like, you know what, I'm finally talking about this. I'm talking to other people, and they can hear me, and they can hear in my voice the emotion and the upset, that came when this executive at NPR called me to tell me what a bad human being I was, but also what a bad journalist I was, and how I could never have any credibility as a journalist for simply having said what I felt in that situation.
Mm-hmm. We're having a conversation with Fox commentator and author Juan Williams. I thought it was interesting listening to your explanation about the book and how politically incorrect it was for you to feel nervous. I mean, I've had the same feeling, looking at people in Muslim garb as you're standing in line getting on the plane, and obviously you're going to have second thoughts, but why is that politically incorrect? It shouldn't be, but why is it in our society? Why have we gotten that sensitive about that type of feeling?
Well, I'm not sure, because to me, if you're honest about feelings, well, then it gives you the opportunity to explore them, to discuss them, as we're doing today on this show. And I think in that case, another factor was that I was appearing on Bill O'Reilly's show on the Fox News Channel, and I think that woman, the executive at NPR, just views Fox as out of bounds and didn't like the idea that I also worked for Fox. Remember, I worked for Fox before I worked for NPR.
That's right, yeah.
But in her mind, I was adding credibility or legitimacy to Fox, which she did not view as a legitimate news organization, and she had been telling me not to even use my NPR ID when I appeared on Fox. Like, anybody would say, oh, well, that's a different Juan Williams than the one I hear on NPR. I don't know who this guy is, that's on Fox. Just craziness. But clearly antagonistic towards Fox, and I think that played into why she was looking for a reason, I think, to just throw me out the door. And then she picked up on this, which I think, again, is just the worst, because it's contrary to journalistic principle, which is that you want full-blooded, honest discussion and debate of issues, and you want people to tell you what they're feeling, what they're thinking, so that you can respond to it. Recently, Pat Buchanan, for example, lost his position at MSNBC. Pat wrote a book that had what apparently the executives at MSNBC felt were sentiments that were out of bounds, so racially charged that they were not comfortable with them. My feeling, and I wrote this in a column, was to say, those are the kind of feelings and attitudes that I want somebody to say out loud to me so we can discuss them, so that we don't have them just festering in some dark corner of the American mind or held together and shared at some private dinner among people of one racial group. I think it's important that we as Americans have these discussions and get it out on the table. There is no way after 9/11 that you can talk about America without talking about increased security at airports, the war on terror, bin Laden, the assault on bin Laden, all of this. This is part of who we are. And to say, oh, well, don't mention that there is some anxiety in the American mind today about the presence of Muslims among us, just invites people then to think, oh, you can't say what's on your mind, and to that sentiment, that anger to build up, and then you have things like, the attack on the Muslim cab, the guy thought it was a Muslim cab driver in New York, or the minister in Florida who wanted to burn the Koran. These things are not healthy in a democratic society, that, to my mind, anti-American. You want the discussion, you want the debate, let's talk. We're Americans.
We've had Pat Buchanan on the show and talking about his book, and I thought his argument for the book was actually pretty good. I understand where he's coming from, and it was a logical argument. But on the same line, Clay and I are both insurance people, and I have an insurance office, and I have a lot of business in Los Angeles, and I have clients in South Central. When I call them up to set up an appointment, they will tell me that we will meet you out of the area because it is not safe for you to go to this particular area. And
right.
that's them telling me. So, it's there whether we want to talk about it or not.
Exactly. And guess what? People do talk about it privately. The question is whether or not you talk about it publicly. And I think that we need to have these discussions in public so you can hear the entire universe of approaches, perspectives, and people can learn from each other. There's no sin in talking across political lines, across racial lines, across ethnic lines, lines of sex. Talk. Get it out. I think that's why your show just the best, because people can hear and decide for themselves. What's wrong with that?
Mm-hmm. Let's pick up there when we get back, okay, Juan?
Absolutely.
We'll be back in a moment with Juan Williams on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk 1180.